Hello, this is Eric,
And I'm Brandon.
and this is episode 2 of
ProgPod.
Last week, we had our first episode where we talked about our descents into progressive music and how we got into the music. That was a pretty long episode. This week is probably the first normal episode, I'd say.
Yeah, this is going to feature some regular segments we hope to introduce on this episode and do regularly over time.
Yeah, one of which is the What Have You Been Listening To? We highlight 5 different bands that we've been listening to in the past week, and we talk about them and go into details about our thoughts on them.
What we like about them, what we don't like about them. I mean, typically it's probably going to be more leaning towards what we like about them, but sometimes you listen to something and you're not digging it and you have some complaints about it, so that can all be highlighted here in this segment.
Yeah, and we're also going to talk about which one was our favorite of those, favorite album of the week. And then after that, we're going to do a spotlight segment that will be kind of a special segment, which isn't going to be every week, but will be some weeks. A special section where it's called the Limelight, where we take a musician that we like a lot and go into detail about them.
Yeah, so it's going to be like a singular musician, and it can be from a band or a solo artist or anything like that. Just a singular musician that we enjoy, and we want to talk about them and give them the appreciation they deserve. So now we're going to do the What Have You Been Listening To segment of the podcast, and Eric is going to start us off with his first entry.
Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about, first one I've been listening to this week a lot, is a band called Hammers of Misfortune. The main album I've been listening to by them is The August Engine, which is my second favorite album by them. They're a band that I've liked for a long time. They're probably in my top 15 or so favorite bands of all time. They're just a very creative band that kind of blends a bunch of different genres. Early on in their career, they blended progressive rock and heavy metal and black metal. But as they went on, they kind of dropped the sort of black metal influence and got more and more progressive over time, adding various instruments, even adding some flutes and things like that. But throughout their whole discography, all their albums stand alone very well, and they all tell a story, and they all have cool little a cool atmosphere, a cool vibe that's very unique. I haven't really been able to find a band with a similar atmosphere. It's almost like a dystopian type atmosphere, and a lot of their songs, a lot of their albums are about things that are in real life, but using stories to convey that. And the August Engine, which is the main album from them I've listened to this week, is one that's about actually the music industry, and about how being a little tiny piece of the music industry, you get swallowed up and stuff. And this was written back in the early 2000s, when that was especially true, before streaming services came along, and it was just really, really difficult. I mean, it still is now.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to be a underground recording artist, because if you can't, it was harder than put out your own stuff and everything. So that's what that's about, and it's a really cool album. It really has a cool blend of metal and acoustic instrumentation, and lots of cool transitions back and forth. The first song is called The August Engine Part 1, and that's a really, really cool metal song that kind of transitions into a song called Rainfall, which is a very nice little acoustic interlude thing. Wasn't that really an interlude, it's just a song. Yeah, so that's my first one. Okay, and now Brandon's going to tell us about his first What Have You Been Listening To?
Okay, so just to preface, I have multiple big lists on my phone of bands I like and whose discographies I've listened to completely, and then I have a list where future bands who I want to do that with. And recently I've been doing a thing where I'm going back through these massive lists and re-listening to everything, which is fun because there's a lot of stuff I'm really, really familiar with, and there's a lot of stuff I'm familiar with but not as familiar with because I haven't listened to as much of the other stuff. So it's a really good way to see oh, do I like this more than I did when I first listened to it? Do I like it less? Is it about the same? So that's what I've been doing a lot recently with my listening. And one of those bands who I've done a re-listen with is Marillion. And they are an English neo-progressive rock band that formed in the early 80s, I believe. And they're credited with founding this resurgence of progressive rock in England, drawing from influences such as Genesis, Yes, and all the big named ones. But they're a band that I think is really good, but I think is a little overrated in the progressive community. They're hailed as one of the greatest modern prog bands. And I like them a lot, but I don't think I like them as much as some other people like them. But describing their sound is difficult as well because there's two main eras in their music. The first being the Fish era, which is their first vocalist in the 80s, where they released 4 albums that are considered classics of the neo-prog movement and prog in general. And then they moved on to their next vocalist, Steve Hogarth, who has been with the band since studio album 5 to present day, which is a lot of albums because they have 17 studio albums. So there's 2 different eras, and the first era is really more defined by this almost like theatrical sound. Fish has sings in a really weird way. I feel like it could be off-putting to a lot of people the way he sings. It's very theatrical. It's very dramatic. I do think the production is quite good on these albums for the most part. The bass is really in your face, and the guitars sound great. I think Maroyan's production in the 80s and neo-prog in general in the 80s has a really different production to a lot of old school prog and other types of modern prog that is, I think, for me at least, it was hard to get used to at first. It's a little thinner, I think, production wise, and typically I don't like a thinner production style, but once I've gotten used to it, and some of those early neo-prog bands, I'm fine with it now. But anyways, the second half of their discography with Steve Hogarth, which is a much larger half of their discography, is much different. A couple times they tried to completely lose that progressive tag. They didn't try super hard because they were still releasing albums and songs with very long numbers in them, reaching the 15 to 20 minute mark sometimes. And I would say the latter half of their discography is more defined by really slow builds. They have some really long songs, and a lot of the music is quieter. It's not quite as rocky in some parts. And I think there's a lot of nuanced stuff instrumentally that's really cool on some of the albums. I think sometimes it doesn't work as well on the albums I don't like as much. But I guess some albums I think that you should check out because it's a very big discography that can be daunting to look at. Some ones that I recommend is Misplaced Childhood, which is often considered their best by many people, which is their third album, and it's with Fish on vocals. And then Brave, which is the classic Steve Hogarth album. It's a concept album as well. Both are concept albums. And then I would definitely check out Clutching at Straws and Script for a Jester's Tear, which are also classic Fish albums. And then for 2 more Hogarth albums, I would check out Fear, which is their most recent album, which I think is one of their better albums they've ever released, and Marbles, which is an album from the mid 2000s, which is a very long double album, but has a lot of good material on it. So I would definitely check out Maroyan, and that's what I've been listening to a lot lately as my first entry.
All right. Another band that I've been listening to a lot this week is Haken. Just because, and Haken is one of me and Brandon's favorite bands of all time. Mm-hmm. We've seen them live 3 times.
3 times,
and we both love them a whole lot and think they're really, really good.
Yeah, anytime they come to the US, we go to wherever it is closest to us. We will go and see them. That is 100%. The tradition now at this point.
The first time we went all the way to Richmond, which is 7.5 hours away on a good day.
Yeah,
traffic it's a lot more. So every once in a while I just get in the mood to listen to some Haken, and that's what I do. So I've been listening to a few albums by them this week. I went back and listened to parts of The Mountain and Affinity, which are 2 of my favorite albums ever. And I also, but the main album I've been listening to from them this week is Vector, which is the album that came out last year. It's an album I like a lot. It ended up 6th, I think, on my year-end list last year. And I think it's still going to be, that's the position it will stay at. But it's a really good album. It has a lot of really catchy melodies and things that just hook in your ear. So once I get on the loop of listening to this album, I just listen to it over and over again. It's also really short. It helps that it's really short. It's 44 minutes. So it's on a ride to work, I can listen to the album pretty much, and I listen to it on the way back. And so I just listen to it over and over again whenever I'm in the mood to. And especially because the whole album flows really well, but the first 4 songs are just absolutely perfect together. And the rest of it is also really good. It's not dissing the second half of the album, but just Clear going into The Good Doctor, which has that really crazy build up and everything in the middle and then towards the end. It's so good. And then Puzzle Box ends on that amazing vocal melody, which was my favorite melody of 2018. And then also that going into Veil, which is my favorite song on the album. It's just like honestly so good. That whole song is just like amazing. Like it starts off with such a cool riff in the beginning. Well, it starts off with like the kind of quiet part. Then it builds up in like a really really cool riff, and it goes all the way. Like it goes with that riff, and it like is all heavy and stuff. And then there's that part in the middle where me and you both, the first time we listened to it, we like thought it was like a different song.
Oh,
like the piano part, the piano break.
Yeah, where it like changes to the like quieter part, the more atmospheric part in the middle.
Yeah, and then the rest of the song is also like really really good. And then the rest of the album, honestly, a lot of people think the song was divisive, but I really like Know by Mouth too a whole lot. I really think that's a cool instrumental track. And the rest of the album is also really good. But just like once I start listening to the album, I like have to listen to the whole thing. Like if I listen to The Good Doctor, if I listen to Clear or whatever, it's like, come on.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna listen to the whole thing. And so it's really really good. I've been enjoying listening to that this week. I always enjoy listening to any Haycan. Do you have any thoughts about that?
It's funny that you brought up Vector because I've been wanting to listen to this album for maybe 2 weeks, but haven't done it yet, and it's gonna happen soon. Eventually, my urges of wanting to listen to it are just gonna overtake whatever else I'm trying to listen to, and I'm just gonna pop it on one day. But I was close today, and I didn't do it though. I almost put it on today, but I also have had this stuck in my head a lot. I haven't listened to it in, I don't know, maybe a month or something like that. And I really want to listen to it very badly. So it's funny that you brought that one up.
So great album. We both love it. It was second on your year.
Yeah, it was second on my year, and I actually didn't.
Funny,
I actually didn't like it at first.
Yeah, which is crazy.
And it was like maybe one of the biggest growers of an album for me, like I've ever listened to. From where it went from initial like liking of it to like where it was at the end of the year, because it was my second favorite album that year.
And a really good year, like top quality, like competition. Anyways,
the second band I've been listening to this week is a band called Seventh Wonder. They're a progressive metal band from Sweden. Progressive power metal, really. They draw from a lot of power metal influences and a lot of like prog power influences, and so they draw from like Symphony X and Dream Theater as well, who isn't really prog power, but like if you're a prog metal band that sounds anything like what Seventh Wonder sounds like, you listen to some Dream Theater at some point. But yeah, they're a cool band from Sweden. They're all really, really good at their instruments. Their guitarist is absolutely insane. He just throws down some wicked riffs and some really, really, really shred-tastic solos. And everyone else in the band's really good too. One of the other dudes that's really good in the band is their lead singer, Tommy Karavik. Pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right. He's got a ridiculously good voice. Really, really good range, really good pitch and everything. Can hit some super high notes as well. He's super talented. Everyone else in the band is also super talented. They're really good at like songwriting. They write really good songs, really like tight songs. The production is typically very good, especially on their albums Mercy Falls and The Great Escape. And they're definitely progressive as well. Reaching, I think the longest song they've ever released is The Great Escape, which is a 30-plus minute song, which I think is a very good song. So for the most part, I really like this band. They are a little cheesy, though. Some of the lyrical themes can definitely be a little cheesy, but I, for the most part, just deal with it with this band because I think the instrumentation and the vocal work is like so excellent that it just like kind of like it doesn't like detract too much from my enjoyment of the band. Just because I think all the other stuff is really good as well. So Mercy Falls and The Great Escape are the two I would definitely recommend. Their newest album, Tiara, actually was a big disappointment for me this year, which I guess I'll highlight now. I was really looking forward to the new album because I hadn't released an album in, I think it had been like before 2008. It came out last year, 2018. I think it had been like 8 years since they had last released an album. So a lot of people were excited for it. And I didn't like it as much. I thought the songwriting was a little stale. And I thought the production was not very good at all, which is weird because up until this point in their career, on the three albums with Tommy Karavik, they had really, really good production, and the production was just not the same at all. Like the bass was really quiet, the drums sounded really, really off and funky, and I just thought Tommy's vocals sounded like a little like buried in the mix, which I thought was strange. But I was a little disappointed with that album. But overall, a band that I definitely recommend checking out if you're into any sort of prog power, or if you're not, this is probably a good starting point for that subgenre.
So speaking of your battles with cheese, I have a similar story about an album that I think is somewhat cheesy.
Can we start a segment about that called The Battles of Cheese?
The Battles of Cheese? Yeah, what should we call it?
The
Swiss Guard.
The Swiss Guard.
So I've been listening to a band called Aether Realm. They have 2 full lengths and an EP. I've listened to both albums, but the main one that has been like stuck in my head is Tear It, which is their most recent album. And they're a band from Greenville, North Carolina, not Greensboro. And this is their second full length. And at the end of 2017, I heard about this band because people were giving it like really, really high ratings and putting it on the end of year-end lists. And like a lot of those people are people I really respect their opinions, and like I wait for reviews for them because they're like really good and have similar tastes as me. And they really were like hyping up this album, so I was really excited to check it out. And I checked it out, and at first I was like, oh, like the instruments are cool, but some of it's like so cheesy. Like I said I thought it was the lyrics, like some of them were okay, but some of them were they were from Cheeseville, USA, in the county of Cheeselumbia, in the state of North Cheese, in the country of Cheesistan. And particularly offensive to me at the time was the song King of Cups, which is like a drinking song. And I was like, oh, come on, dude. Like, this is just like so cheesy. They just talk about like, oh, drink this brew, you know, in like a medieval-y voice. And so I kind of like abandoned it and forgot about that album pretty much totally for about a year. But recently I was kind of like looking for like some live shows. So I was sort of like, oh, I'm kind of itching to see a live show and also go to Asheville. So I found out that this band was coming to Asheville with another band that is super hyped up that I think I like a little more than this one, but I'm actually not talking about them right now. Wilderun. And so I was really excited, and the tickets were only $10. So I was like, okay, I'll give them another shot if I'm going to go see them. And I bought the tickets. And so I've been listening to this album a bunch this week, and I'm happy to say that I think that the lyrics are still cheesy, but I think that I can overlook them a little bit now. I still think they hold this album back from being like a great album. I just think it's like a very good album, but I don't think it's like going to end up on any like permanent list for me ever, mostly because of the cheesy lyrics. But the instrumentation is really cool and diverse. Like there's different stuff in there from like electronic type, like chiptune intros and things like that, to like medieval style instrumentation and medieval like scales, even when it's like using heavy instrumentation. A lot of times they use like medieval type scales and things like that. And the lyrics are cheesy sometimes. Sometimes they're not that bad, but there are a few times where they're cheesy. But it's also it goes along with the theme, because I think each of the songs is supposed to represent like a character from like a tarot card or something. So it kind of makes sense that it's like a little like silly. And the guy obviously who like writes for the band like doesn't seem to take it like so crazy serious either. So that helps a little bit. Anyways, I'm really excited to see what they do next. Their first album is way less cheesy for me, but it's like less interesting as well. And I think this album is more interesting. And so hopefully they'll combine the two things and have one that isn't as cheesy, but is, you know, still interesting and stuff. One thing about this album that's really cool I'd like to point out is that they have really cool melodies, fun melodies, and really catchy like anthemic choruses. And that's like the biggest thing that the album does the best, I think, is just like they have these really cool choruses that almost have you like singing along, honestly, like in the car, and doing some like air guitar stuff, because there's lots of really good, like the guitarist is super good, and the drummer's really good too. It has good production. So good album, worth a listen. Not gonna end up on any like permanent lists or anything.
All right, the third band I want to highlight this week from what I've been listening to is a band called Barren Earth. They're a progressive death metal band from Finland, and I first heard about them through Eric. Eric gave me their third album, On Lonely Towers, for Album of the Week, and I really liked that album when I was suited for Album of the Week, and that inspired me to go listen to their back catalog, which at the time only consisted of 2 other albums, and didn't feature their main vocalist now, whose name is John something. I can't remember his last name. I know his first name is John. I went back this week and I've been listening to their discography, and the first 2 albums are really good as well, but not quite as good as On Lonely Towers, because I think the vocalist on the first 2 albums is not quite as good, and I also think the songwriting is significantly better on Lonely Towers, and I think On Lonely Towers is their most progressive album, and On Lonely Towers specifically is just a really, really good album. It's got really, really good production. The riffs are kick-ass. John, the vocalist, is insanely talented. I think what really sets him apart from their old vocalist is that he's a really, really good death growler, but also he has a ridiculously good, like, clean vocal voice as well.
Similar, like operatic. Like,
similar to like how Michael Ockerfeldt of Opeth blends those two so like seamlessly together. He doesn't sound like him at all, but he does both really, really, really well. And there's some really, really catchy choruses on this album, especially the second track, Hal, has this really, really catchy chorus in it. The song Satellite has a really, really awesome chorus as well that like blends both death growls and clean vocals in it. My favorite song on the album is the title track on Lonely Towers, which has this really interesting, like really slow intro with the guitar or whatever before building to this really powerhouse of a song, closing out with just a ridiculous solo from their guitarist. That's really, really good. But the whole album in general is really good. And their newest album, A Complex of Cages, which came out last year, was one of my most anticipated releases last year and didn't quite live up to what I thought it would be. I liked it, but I didn't love it. I thought they were kind of just doing a prog death paint by numbers almost and didn't really make any real progression from On Lonely Towers. But I've been listening to it this week, and while I still think all those things I just said, I have appreciated it more this week, and it's been stuck in my head a lot, actually. The songwriting is still really good on this album. I just think it's not quite as progressive as On Lonely Towers, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's worth noting that, like, while revisiting this album again, I like it a little more than I did maybe when I was listening to it last year. So that band's really good. I definitely recommend checking out their two latest releases, On Lonely Towers and Complex of Cages.
Okay, so the next band that I've been listening to is a band that's arguably progressive rock. A lot of people would say they are. I think they are sometimes, but not always. And I don't know if they are consistently enough to be called a prog band, but that doesn't really matter. The band is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, and I've been listening to like several of their albums, but the main one I've been listening to this past week is Nonagon Infinity. So Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard they're a prog garage band, psychedelic band from Australia, and they've gotten quite a bit of traction. They have I think around 600,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, which is the last I checked, which puts them, if they're a prog band, which they're not really, and they're at least culturally they're not from the same background, put them in the top tier of those. Not that matters for quality at all, but just interesting fact. And they're really well known for their diversity between albums and also for their prolific output of albums. They've actually released 13 albums since their formation in 2010, and they actually put out 5 albums that were all well received in 2017, which is a pretty monumental feat. Most people have a difficult time putting out one album every other year and maintain the quality, So I think some of their albums would fit under the prog umbrella. Either way, they're an interesting band, and they do quite a few interesting things that are different from typical bands. They have one album, for example, that it's called Flying Microtonal Banana, and it uses all microtones, which is a really interesting thing and really weird, and that's pretty cool. And it's a good album. Too. So they do all that stuff, all this experimentation, and it works really well. All the members in the band play all different instruments and everything. They have all these crazy instruments in there, a zurna, and a setar, setar, and all these other crazy things didgeridoos and things like that. So they're all pretty talented guys. Anyway, so the main album I'm listening to this week by them is Nonagon Infinity, which is an album that's meant to be played as a loop. And there's 9 tracks, and they all flow into each other perfectly, without any break at all. And the last track flows perfectly into the first track. So you can start the album from any place on the album and listen to it again, and it's it works perfectly well. And I think as well that it doesn't work quite as well, but I think you can also listen to it in any order. Because I've been experimenting with that last week. You can listen to it in any order, and it also works. It doesn't always flow as seamlessly as it does if you just listen to it linearly. But any order still works, at least mood-wise, which is a really, really cool idea. They have 2 drummers who are just playing their hearts out the whole time, and they have their bassist is playing his heart out the whole time. It's very fast. There's a very fast tempo going on throughout the whole album. There's lots of exciting vocal styles. There's chanting and singing, and there's sort of energetic howls that they do that really add to the energy. They're just some guys out in the town, having a good night or whatever. And it's all very catchy too. So it makes for a really fun listen. And I think overall it's a good album. Sometimes it gets a little bit monotonous, which like I think that could be a consequence of them trying to make the whole thing like flow perfectly and like not really have a set like track order. So I think that's kind of a consequence of that, but it is really good, and I appreciate that they like attempted to do something cool like that. And I think it works a little more if you think of it more as like a single long song that can be jumbled around than like an album of different songs. And it also has lots of like reprises and recurring motifs that also add to the whole like, oh, it's kind of like just one song. So it's a really good, pretty good album. It's not like one of my favorites ever or anything, again, but I think it's a good album, definitely worth checking out.
All right, my fourth installment of the What Have You Been Listening To segment is just a singular album. Haven't been listening to this band's discography, and it's a band called Soen from Sweden, and it is their new album Lotus, which is getting a lot of hype in prog circles currently, and I think it is their best album they've released so far. I think it's got the best production. I think it's got the best songwriting. I think it's got the best performances from all of the band members. It features Martin Lopez, formerly of Opeth, on drums. And I don't know any of the other band members' names, but their bassist is quite good as well. I enjoy the bass playing a lot, and I also enjoy the vocal work. The vocal work is really, really good. And on this album, I think they've like expanded their sound a little more. They oftentimes got a lot of flack from me for sounding a little too much like Tool and Opeth had a baby, which is how I always describe them. The lead singer actually, to me, kind of sounds like Maynard James Keenan sometimes. But anyways, yeah, it kind of makes sense that they had that Opeth vibe. One of their members was from Opeth, and the Tool influence is obvious as well to me. But I think they've shedded that a little bit here, and I think this is like the most original album they've released, which is why I think I like it so much. They've added like some more like piano and keyboardy stuff to add to the atmosphere, which I think is really interesting, and it gives the songs a lot more depth, in my opinion. There's a lot of cool atmosphere stuff going on here. There's a lot of heavy stuff as well, which I really like, but I think they blend the two like really, really well, and there's some really cool vocal work on the album. Like I've said, I like the vocalist a lot. He's got a really powerful voice, and there's some really, really catchy choruses on this album. So I've been listening to this album a lot and liking it like more and more with each listen. So I definitely recommend this album to anyone who is new to this band or is looking for something new to listen to. It's called Lotus by Soen.
Okay, so in the interest of saving time, last week I actually kind of glossed over like one album that was really influential into my descent into prog or whatever, and that album was Crimson by Edge of Sanity. And if you don't know, Crimson is a 40-minute progressive death metal song / album, and it's like a really cool concept. It tells like the tale of like a sci-fi futuristic dystopia in which people can no longer reproduce, and there's like this one like girl who like is like, I guess like this king and queen like have a baby or whatever, and then like it turns out to be super evil and stuff. It's really convoluted, like a lot of prog concepts are, but it is really interesting, and like well written and everything. But the main reason why it was so influential into my descent was because the harsh vocals are really good in that album. Dan Swano is the frontman, and he's been the frontman of like over 100 bands, which is, or not the frontman. He's been involved in like around 100 bands, and that's pretty crazy. And he's just like very good at doing harsh vocals. I don't know why those, because like they're pretty harsh, but for some reason like those ones just like didn't bother me that much in the beginning. And so I kept coming back to that album over and over again, despite like initially not being like super into like growls or whatever. It's helped me a lot. Anyway, that album is like definitely like in my top like 50 something albums of all time. I really like it. And I do a weird thing. Brandon knows this about me. Sometimes when I like really like an album from a band, I kind of like avoid listening to some of their other stuff in order to like save the albums. And that's like especially a thing when the band no longer exists and won't be producing any new stuff. Because it's like if I listen to all this stuff, then I'll never have anything new to listen to by them. Which isn't like super logical, but I don't know, it's kind of fun. So I actually just listened to this Crimson 2 this week. And Crimson 2 itself has like kind of a fun story. So Dan Swano was in the band Edge of Sanity when Crimson, like the first Crimson was recorded. And when they released their next album, he like quit like right after it was recorded because of creative differences. And so for that album and the next album, they like released those albums without him in the band. And those albums were like not very well received. at all by their fan base, and the band dissolved in like 1999. But he actually like refounded the band just like on his own without anyone else in the band, and like released Crimson 2 as Edge of Sanity with like no one else except for like a couple of guest vocalists and like guest guitarists sometimes. And that album was like super well received, and most people say that it's like just as good as Crimson 1, if like maybe not quite as good, but some people like it more. I don't think I like it more yet. I've only listened to it like twice, and one of the times I was like running, so it wasn't like super the best conditions to listen to something for the first time or second time or whatever it was. And so anyways, so it's a really cool album. Dan Swarno, he does like all the instrumentation, all the drums, all the bass, all the keyboards and synths and stuff, and the guitars. He's like a very, very talented guitarist on this album. And in comparison to Crimson 1, I think this album is like more diverse. There's like more of a heavy focus on like synths, and it's a lot more technical. There are a lot more guitar solos. I think Dan Swarno, he like definitely like improved as a guitarist between the first album and the second one. That said, I don't think it's like quite as cohesive of a project. So I'm not gonna like tell you like my final thoughts on it because it's gonna be a while before I know. I'll have to listen to it a lot more times. But I don't think it'll end up. I don't think I'll end up liking it as much as Crimson 1, even though there's some things that like are instantly more grabbing and more like, oh, that's like cool that he did that solo, and it's like more dynamic too. There's like more different parts and more different riffs and things that I've thrown together. It also has some like really, really cool reprises of Crimson 1. So it's like really good. If you want to listen to Crimson 2, I would definitely recommend listening to Crimson 1 first. So even though I don't think I'll end up liking it as much as Crimson 1, I do really like it. It's a really good album. Definitely recommend checking it out. Dan Swarno is a god. He's super good. He like was very, very influential in the early Swedish death metal scene, early progressive death metal scene, and all that. Also, Mike Åkerfeldt is in the first album, too, so.
All right, my fifth and final band I've been listening to a lot this week, and this is the band I've probably been listening to the most this week, and I didn't plan that in any way whatsoever. But this band is called The Ocean. They are from Germany. Well, they're from a bunch of different places, actually. There's a bunch of members in the band scattered throughout Europe. But the main guy, Robin Stops, I think is how you pronounce his name, is from Germany. He's their lead guitarist, lead songwriter, lead everything. He's pretty much in charge of the whole operation going on there. And they're a really interesting band because when they first started, they were called the Ocean Collective, and I think they still go by that sometimes. And they did this thing where on every album they would bring in a bunch of musicians and vocalists and stuff, and they'd record an album, and then on the next album they'd just like scrap everything and bring in a bunch of new different musicians and stuff like that. And the only constant in the beginning was Robin Stops was the only constant in the project. So it's really cool. You get like a diverse range of like sounds and styles, which is probably talk about what their style is. They're a progressive metal band, particularly like focused. If you want to get really, really specific, I think they're a progressive atmospheric sludge metal band, which is a really specific
that statement, though.
genre. But I think that describes their sounds pretty well. And they do a lot of cool things with their music. Their first two albums, Fluxion and Aeolian, are like really chaotic and really heavy and really harsh as well. They're definitely not accessible by any means, but I definitely think their whole discography is worth checking out. And I think if you want to listen to them, I honestly think you should just like throw yourself in at the beginning and just like go in order, because it's really fun to see how they've like evolved over their discography. Like the first album that really drew me into them was the album Precambrian, which is a double concept album focused around the different like time periods of the Earth, and it's really interesting how like the album sounds. The first half is like a 25-minute like really heavy, super heavy and shorter songs, just like hitting you right in the face. And the second half is much more atmospheric, much more progressive. There's like an introduction of like cellos and pianos and other strings like that into their music. And it was really that second half that really like drew me in. I was like, oh, this is like really interesting what they're doing here. And like reading about the content and stuff is really interesting because like a lot of like the music like sounds very like, I don't know, it's hard to explain like how that time period might have sounded. Like it's more chaotic in times when the time period is more chaotic, and it's more reserved when there was like some more peace or whatever going on in the world or whatever. But yeah, that album is really interesting, and was definitely the first album that drew me in. And I've been listening to the whole discography this week. Like I said, I've been doing that with a lot of bands I like a lot. And, their next two albums, Heliocentric and Anthropocentric, came out in 2010 and 2011, respectively. And they are also concept albums, and they go together as well. And they're really cool concept albums, and that introduced their current lead vocalist, Loic Rossetti, who is one of my absolute favorite vocalists in music ever. And these two albums kind of take the perspective of like how people thought about the Earth. Heliocentric deals with like the literal theory of like heliocentrism, and it touches on a lot of different subjects, such as religion and science, and critiques certain things like that. And then the second one, Anthropocentric, is more focused on like humans being the center of the universe and how people thought that as well. So they both go together really well. They're really good, and adding Loic to the band added a new dimension to the band, because he's got really, really good harsh vocals and really, really excellent clean vocals as well. And the songwriting is just top notch. But the album the first album I ever listened to them was an album called Plegial, which is a pretty popular album in the progressive metal scene. And I also got that as album of the week. And it was instrumental in helping me. I would say it was one of the more instrumental albums in getting me into harsh vocals. Because I think at the time, maybe Opeth was the only one I had listened to and liked a lot. And when I listened to this one, I immediately fell in love with the harsh vocals. And it's one of my favorite albums of all time, probably somewhere in my top 10 still. And it's got the cool thing about it, it's got this amazing concept. It's 11 songs technically, but it's really supposed to just be one song. It'll show up as 11 songs on Spotify, but it's really just one 50-minute song. And it essentially details it goes from the most shallow layer of the ocean to the deepest layer of the ocean. And it's supposed to be a metaphor for the human psyche as well. But one of the more interesting things about it is that the music also gets heavier as it goes deeper and deeper, which is really interesting. The lyrics are amazing. The instrumentation is incredible, and it's a really, really special album. It gives me all the feels whenever I listen to it, and I listened to it this week twice actually, and it was just a wonderful experience. And then their most recent album, which is probably my second favorite album by them, came out last year, and it was fourth on my list last year. It made the top four, and it's called Phanerozoic 1 Paleozoic. And this is an album that continues the story of Precambrian with going through the time periods of Earth. And it's just a really, really like excellent album. The vocal work again is outstanding. The songwriting is so good. There's this really like in the song Silurian Age of Sea Scorpions, there's this really atmospheric and lush string and piano break in the middle with some beautiful vocal work over it. And the whole album flows really, really well. And it's part one of a two-part album. So it kind of seems like it ends abruptly, but like I know part two is coming. I love how it ends. I don't have a problem with how it ends, this album at all. So I've been listening to them a lot, and I definitely recommend just like all of their albums if you want to get into them. The one I would recommend, I guess, if you don't want to do a full discography dive, is definitely Pelagial. If you just want to jump into an album, that's definitely the one I would go to first and then expand out with them. But I just can't say enough good things about this band.
Yeah, so of the albums that we've been listening to that I've been listening to this week, probably my favorite one, and I'm judging it by like the most improved, honestly, because like any given week I could listen to like my favorite album and that would like always be it. So I'm just gonna say that the most improved / best new one for me is Crimson 2 by Edge of Sanity, just because it's been a long time coming, me listening to that album. So
nice. And mine is the one I just talked about actually, and it's the Ocean's Phanerozoic 1 Paleozoic. I've just been listening to it a lot this week, listened to a lot of songs at random this week, which is actually difficult to do because the album flows so well, so it's very difficult to just put on a singular song. But I have been doing that, and it's just really, really good, and you should definitely check it out.
All right, so this next segment that we're going to do is a new segment that might be a one that we do every once in a while, kind of a special segment, and we're calling it The Limelight, where we take a band member or a musician within the prog community who we like a lot, for whatever reason. It could be some like powerhouse guy like Steven Wilson or something, or like someone we just want to highlight who we like, and we're gonna talk about why we like them. Yeah.
All right, so I am going to talk about Tyler Colts today. maybe not a household name. Their debut in the band he's a part of got a lot of hype this year in the prog community though. But there's next to no information about him on the internet. I can't even find a picture of him.
Yeah.
I have no idea what he looks like. There's really no information on him other than on Prog Archives. You can find that he is the vocalist for this band. That's what I know about him. And he is the vocalist of a band called The World Is Quiet Here. Who bursted onto the scene this year with a concept album, and apparently it's going to be a string of concept albums that are all related to each other, which I think is really interesting. And apparently they're influenced by bands such as The Deer Hunter, and they're clearly influenced by a band called Between the Buried and Me, which is my favorite band ever. But yeah, he is a very interesting vocalist. When I first listened to this album, I thought they had like 2 or even maybe 3 vocalists on the album. I did not think he was doing all the vocal work because his voice sounded too different in some places, and I was like, there's no way that that's the same guy. So he does really good harsh vocals, I think, kind of in like a similar vein to what Tommy Rogers does for Between the Buried and Me, where it's not like full growls, but it's like almost full growls. And he's really good at that, and he has these really, really good soaring, clean vocals that he does, and there's a lot of really, really good choruses on this album that are just really, really catchy, and the melodies, these vocal melodies he lays down on some of these clean choruses are incredible, and part of the reason I thought it was a different guy is because I thought it could be the same guy for those clean vocals and the harsh vocals, but like a lot of the time on the verses when he does this other type of clean vocal, he does these like weird voices he puts on. It's really hard to explain, but he just like contorts his voice in such a way that he sounds like a completely different person. And there's a couple instances on the album where he just sounds really weird, and it's got this really like creepy vibe almost. And it's really interesting how he's able to do that, and those vocal sections were why I thought it was a different vocalist, because I thought there's no way that's the same guy doing those like really, really clean and melodic like choruses as well as the harsh vocals. I was like, there's no way they have 2 vocalists at least. And I figured out after like a while of listening to the album that it was just this guy, and I think he's just got like a really, really diverse voice, and I think his voice fits the music perfectly and the story they're trying to tell, which I'm still not quite aware what the story is, because again, there's
really difficult to find.
Really no information on this band on the internet, which is funny because like it's funny for a band to like get such hype in prog circles and then just be no information on the internet about them. But yeah, he's got a really diverse range, really good harsh vocals, really good clean voice. And there's a couple instances that I think are like worth noting. It's on the song "See the Sun," which is the 13-minute second to last song on the album. That's a really big part of the album. He starts off with like his harsh vocals and then bursts into this around the 3-minute mark, this really anthemic chorus that sounds nothing like some of the other clean vocal stuff on this song. And at the end of the song, he does this really, really weird vocal line. He just like kind of drags his voice out. It's really hard to explain. You'd have to hear the song. I definitely recommend checking out the album because the whole album's fantastic, and all of the stuff on the album is also well. But the lead singer is just really, really good, and I really can't wait to see what him and his band do next and how he continues to push himself vocally, because I think it's their debut as well. So I think it's really, really impressive that he's doing all this on the debut. So I'm so curious to see where Tyler Colts goes as a vocalist next. And they're from Wisconsin, in the US of A. So also interesting. Don't listen to a lot of bands from Wisconsin.
All right, so I'm going to do mine now. This is the first of these segments, and I'm going to pick someone who isn't so established. And I'm mostly picking him because his name is easy to pronounce. And his name is Nick Lee, and he's from the band Moontooth. I'm kidding about the name being easy to pronounce. It is, but that's not why I'm picking him. I'm picking him because he is a guitarist who I feel doesn't get enough recognition. And I think he's a real rising star in the prog world. And he has an album coming out later this year, so it's a good time to like talk about him, hopefully, and build some hype among our like 70 viewers. This guy is he's a newer member of the stalwart heavy metal band Riot V, which is like a very long-lasting band. I think they started in like 78 or something, which is crazy. He's also in a band called Exemption, which was a precursor to his main project, which is Moontooth. Moontooth has just one album, Chroma Paragon, and they have an EP, but they also have an album coming up, which is called Crux. And they've released one single from that album, which I like a lot. The band as a whole is like stacked in terms of talent. Like everyone in the band is really good. The drummer is like super good, especially Obviously, Nick Lee, I'm talking about him, so he's really good. The vocalist is really good. Some people don't like the vocals, but the vocalist is very, very talented. Also, the bassist is really good. He isn't always like present, but when he like is doing something, it's always really cool. Anytime you can hear the bassist do something, it's always like a really interesting thing. So everyone in the band is really good, and I think that if their next album, if the next few albums are like close to the quality of their first album, I think they could like earn a spot among like the top names in progressive metal. Like I don't think they're currently there, but I think they could easily be there eventually. Like with Leprous and Caligula's Horse and Beatsy Bam and those types of bands that are like at the forefront of modern progressive metal. And like as a testament to that, they already have like 55,000, I think, like monthly listeners on Spotify. Which is quite a bit. I think when I started listening to them, they were like maybe like 1,000 or something like that. Which is, I guess I liked them before they were cool, man.
Yeah, very hipster of you.
Yeah. So they built up somewhat of a buzz. So anyone will tell you, fans of the genre and people who don't like the genre will tell you that progressive metal is full of talented guitarists. People love to dismiss shreddy guitar playing as being emotionless, but good technical guitar playing can be just as emotional as stereotypically like soulful type stuff, and we both agree on that.
Yeah, of course.
Pretty intensely. That said, whatever the amount of talent it takes, there are plenty of shredding guitar players in progressive music. Not that that's like bad, not that it doesn't take talent, but there are a lot of them. And it takes someone special to really like stand out and use their technical chops to carve out a unique style, and that's just what Nick Lee does. Throughout Chrome and Paragon, Nick showcases his unique style, playing with an incredible energy. And this quality is readily apparent from the first notes of the album. In Queen Wolf is the first song on the album, and like he comes out of the gate just like a herd of bulls ready to like trample everything, like lighting everything on fire and blowing everyone up. That's what I like to think about when the album comes on. It's really good. So in addition to that, he also he has some really creative and catchy but interesting riffs. They're like very angular. He also brings in a lot of influence from outside genres like blues and even punk for many of his riffs and sometimes some of his solos. But he's never one to linger on a single riff for too long, and he often transitions between several different really complex riffs in just like a few seconds. Additionally, he's like the only guitarist in his band, which is actually kind of difficult to tell. I actually didn't know that there was only one guitarist in the band when I was listening to it for the first couple of times listening to the album. And he plays the lead and rhythm guitars. He does both very well, and he like deftly switches between the two styles and blurs the lines between them. In all, I think Nick Lee is a very technically gifted guitarist, but it's his creativity and unique playing style that makes him special. And this, along with the rest of the band, makes them like a really special band to me, and one that I'm really looking forward to. I'm very hyped up for the next album, especially because they released a single, which I didn't like as much at first, but like it's grown on me a lot. So I really like their single, and I'm like very stoked. And I'm also seeing them live, and they're apparently like a really good live band.
All right, so now we're going to do our song rec of the episode, like we always do. The one time we've done it so far. It is now becoming a tradition, though. And the song I'm going to recommend is Living Sepulchre / Vessel by the band While Heaven Wept. While Heaven Wept is a progressive power / doom metal band, which is a really weird combination of styles, because doom is the end of the world, darkness, sorrow, depression, and power is the complete opposite of that for the most part. It's usually a little more cheery, a little happier, but they combine both those styles really well, and they're a really, really good band. They have a great vocalist. They also have a really good guitar player who lays down some really, really catchy and memorable riffs that are super unique in my opinion as well. But yeah, this album is called Vast Oceans Lacrimose, and the song is the third song on the album. It's an 11-minute song. It's got like two somewhat distinct parts, but flow into each other like really perfectly though. The first part is more of like a stereotypical like it sounds very like heavy metal-y almost, before it transitions into this beautiful acoustic guitar part that leads into this really nice little riff, really quiet riff that they play before bouncing back into this like really, really, really catchy riff, and then the rest of the song is just this it's got like a very like verse chorus structure, but it's got this really, really emotional like the way the guy sings is super emotional, and it's got one of like my favorite choruses like ever. It's like one of the most like sing-alongable choruses ever, and it's really really uplifting. The song and the album in general is really really like uplifting. And like I don't know, whenever you're like down, this song can like always like bring you up, and I think the whole album does that really well as well. It's just like really it makes you feel like I can get over like whatever I'm going through, whatever kind of thing. It's a really good song. It's a really good album, so I definitely recommend checking out the song "Living Sepulchre/Vessel" by While Heaven Wept.
Okay, and my song that I picked, I'm actually not going to talk about it for very long because I've already talked about it for quite a bit. But the song is Crimson 1, not 2, by Edge of Sanity. It's one 40-minute long song that tells a really cool sci-fi story. If you listen to it and you like it, I would really recommend like looking up this story, or maybe even just like reading along the lyrics, because it's easy enough to follow along with what's happening. And it's really cool. Just it's very dynamic and everything. It has lots of cool guest vocalists like by Michael Okerfeld. So it's really cool. Like the album, check it out. It's long. Then listen to Crimson 2 afterwards.
Yeah, that is the end of this episode. We hope you guys enjoyed. And we will see you next time on ProgPod.